Dear students, welcome to this lecture. Today we will be discussing an important topic on the emergence of the discipline of peace and conflict resolution. The main objectives of this lecture are to have an overall understanding about the emergence of peace and conflict resolution, to know the debates about its nomenclature, to understand the different phases in the emergence of peace and conflict resolution, and finally, to know the important characteristic features of the discipline of peace and conflict resolution. Peace and conflict resolution is an interdisciplinary field of inquiry animated by a desire to build sustainable peace at all levels of society through policy-relevant research and practice on a broad range of pressing topics, which include concepts and processes that demand justice, promote healing, and create more equitable societies. The root causes of violence in all its forms, including physical, structural, cultural, and environmental. Strategies to prevent, end, and transform violent conflicts through non-violent means. And approaches to promote structural and institutional change at local, national, and global levels. Dear students, the field of peace and conflict resolution recognizes that conflict is inherent in human behavior and seeks to resolve conflict through non-violent means to reduce violence and transform societies. The field of peace and conflict resolution is relatively recent creation, but thinking about peace has a much longer history. The prevalence of violent conflict and war in human history has generated innumerable reflections on causes of war as well as on the possibility of perpetual peace. All the great religious traditions offer reflections on war and peace, although few absolutely prohibit recourse to war. The 17th century philosopher Pascal famously observes, I quote, "Men never do evil so completely and cheerfully as when they do it from religious conviction," unquote. It means religious thought offers an enormous and often highly ambitious body of reflection on the moral constraints surrounding the war. The Christian tradition has been particularly influential here. Initially pacifist, since the 4th century, it has been a key source for contemporary laws of war which attempt to set down the moral limitations of either going to war or fighting in war. Although peace studies are not characterized by a particular emphasis on religious imperatives to pursue peace, many of its modern founders were undoubtedly impelled by private religious commitments, and organized religions remain a key source of funding. The secular view that war is inhibitor of human progress and thus irrational emerges out of enlightenment, most notably in the reflections of philosophers such as Rousseau and Kant. It was Kant who argued that universal justice and perpetual peace were categorical imperatives that humanity was compelled to pursue by virtue of its rational nature. In doing so, Kant's name became synonymous with an idealist or utopian traditions of thinking about global reform founded upon the conception of universal reason and human perfectibility, coupled with more pragmatic pursuit of the domestication of international politics through the institutionalization of interaction between states and the development of international law. Dear students, let's have a look on the debate on nomenclature of this discipline. There have been debates over what term should be used as the generic term to capture the field of peace and conflict resolution. Three positions have emerged from these debates. There are those who adopt the term peace and conflict studies, those who think the discipline should go by the name of conflict resolution, and those who argue for conflict transformation. Notable peace scholars such as Oliver Ramsbotham, Tom Woodhouse, and Hugh Miel are persuaded that the generic term for the field should be conflict resolution. They advance 4 reasons for their position. Number 1, because it was earliest term used to define the new field. Second, because it's still most widely used term among analysts and practitioners. Third, because conflict resolution is the term most familiar to the media and public. Lastly, because conflict transformation is inherently indeterminate unless further qualified. In addition to the fourth reason above, it can be argued that conflict transformation is too narrow a term and can be conveniently accommodated by other terms such as conflict resolution or peace and conflict studies. Mathiok argues that the term peace and conflict studies is wider enough to incorporate subdisciplines as the field matures. Dismissing the arguments for the term conflict resolution, he writes, "A field of study is not a jumble of skills. Conflict resolution practices are important competencies for peace and conflict workers, but they should not define the field, nor who we are." He further suggests conflict analysis and resolution as the philosophical foundation of the field, whereas peace and conflict studies as the academic field of the study, and conflict resolution as the practice component of the field. Dear students, let's discuss the emergence of peace and conflict resolution as a discipline. The origins of peace studies lies in 1950s, when the scholars on both sides of Atlantic endeavored to establish the fields of conflict and peace research. Initially, the focus was on developing systematic, interdisciplinary studies of conflict and war within the confines of positivist understanding of social science. The central concern of peace studies, that is, the reduction of and eventual eradication of war and the control and resolution of violent conflict by peaceful means, do not self-evidently mark it out as a distinct field. Such concerns have treated it through the discipline of international relations from its inception immediately after the First World War. In contrast to this, other focus of peace studies, that is, the definition of peace itself, is arguably better basis for distinguishing it from other cognate fields, not least because it highlights peace studies, but overt and often controversial normative content. Peace and conflict resolution has been marked from the outset by the interdisciplinary origins of its key figures. It has provided a site for researchers initially trained in natural sciences, economics, psychology, anthropology, education, and sociology, and more so in fact than the obvious disciplinary starting points of political science and international relations to come together in the pursuit of peace. To this day, it remains an interdisciplinary field of inquiry, although again this has become decreasingly distinctive feature due to growth of interdisciplinary approaches and outlooks in the social sciences more generally. The multidisciplinary origins of the founders of peace research helped arguably to streamline their original goal of establishing a methodologically distinctive and theoretically robust field of social scientific inquiry. In short, peace and conflict resolution is now perhaps best understood than as a site or intellectual space for bringing together of scholars who by and large only declare a commitment to non-violence, or to borrow from the title of the book by most famous figure John Galton, the realization of peace by peaceful means. This commitment also highlights the historical and at times controversial connection between peace and conflict resolution as an academic field and activism of peace movements. Dear students, let's now discuss the evolutionary phases of peace and conflict resolution. The development of peace and conflict resolution is usually categorized into 5 interconnected generations. First generation, or the precursors era. This phase is also known as precursors era because of the influence of activities of the actors at that stage of evolution of peace and conflict resolution. Development during this period could be classified into 3 broad areas. These are emergence of institutional mechanism, activism, and academic research. The First World War led to the quest for many to find a confident means of avoiding a relapse or recurrence. This quest gave birth to international relations as an academic field of study. International relations courses, centers, and institutes sprung up in many parts of the United Kingdom, continental Europe, and North America, with many of them initially inspired by the desire to promote peace through researching the changing aspects of international politics. Other institutional initiatives include the activities of American internationalists associated with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and the creation of what was likely the first chair of peace research at the University of Lyons, France in 1931. The period also witnessed the involvement of natural scientists in the advocacy for peace. They had felt very uncomfortable with the contribution of science to wars and violence rather than the promotion of peace. There was also certain intellectual atmosphere that pioneered the research into the nature of peace and conflict. Now, the second generation. This period is referred to as the foundational phase of peace studies. One major development in this era was a sustained development in peace and conflict research in the form of institutional growth. In this era, the first peace research laboratory was founded by Theodore Lenz at St. Louis University, Missouri, following the tragedy in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan in 1945. 12 years after, Kenneth Boulding led a small group of academics from various backgrounds to found the Journal of Conflict Resolution in 1957. Institutional mechanisms also continued to grow in Europe, especially in the Scandinavia and Asia. Galtung had helped to form what eventually turned into the International Peace Research Institute of Oslo in 1959. Bert Rolling, a Dutch jurist who had served as a judge at the Japanese war crimes, founded the Polemological Institute in the Netherlands in 1962. The Stockholm International Peace Research Institute was also opened in 1966, just as the Journal of Peace Research was founded in 1964 with John Galtung as its editor. The era also witnessed the works of key founding figures such as Kenneth Boulding, John Galtung, and John Burton. The works of Burton on social conflicts and their resolution featured prominently during this period. Now, the third generation or consolidation era. Peace studies entered its third generation with reasonably sound institutional base as highlighted above. It had defined itself in respect to the pragmatist and structuralist perspectives. Its focus on preventing nuclear war, removing structural forms of violence, and environmental security were no longer in doubts. The consolidation phase, with more academic and scholarly works, advanced the issues raised in the previous generations. Studies and analysis focused on understanding the nature of violent conflict at three levels: domestic level, interstate level, and national or intra-state level. In addition, works on mediation and track to diplomacy became popular among peace practitioners and conflict managers. Now, the fourth phase, or the Reconstruction era. This phase coincided with the end of Cold War and thus presented peace and conflict resolution with the challenge of reconstruction in a new world order. Peace studies attain sophistication in the combination of range of responses to conflict issues and situations. Critical approach to responses in post societies got attention of scholars, just as there were development of professional, quantitative and qualitative methodologies for conflict analysis and resolution. Similarly, criteria for evaluating outcomes and ways of measuring them were improved upon. Scholars insisted and laid emphasis on the multidisciplinary methods, which the founding fathers had used to approach issues in the field. Other key features of Reconstruction era were the continuous proliferation of non-governmental organizations with a focus on peace and conflict issues. Some of these NGOs have indeed gained popularity and respect of state actors across national boundaries. Prominent among these are the International Crisis Group, the International Alert, and the European Centre for Conflict Prevention. Now, the fifth, or Cosmopolitan era. This is the contemporary era. Many issues discussed during the last era have continued to attract attention of scholars, and the field of peace studies has gained international recognition, with many more academic institutions across all regions of the world developing robust programs at the different academic levels in the field. Scholars continue to push for a truly international discipline that draws from all cultures and all parts of the world. For instance, many basic teaching aids, especially from United Nations, University for Peace, incorporates peace concepts and the terms from many cultures of the world. The field also continued to strengthen non-violent capacities within and between societies. This has seen in the much academic and practical training that have fully grown in the field. Apart from growing development of academic programs in universities across the world, particularly in Europe, there has been tremendous growth in the activities of NGOs in the field. Thus, peace and conflict resolution as an academic field of study in the cosmopolitan era is a field thriving with many institutions, academic journals, all levels of degree programs, and peace workers in the field. Scholars engage critically in the issues of peace and conflict, which faces continuous refining, being truly multidisciplinary and focusing on diffusing cultural diversity and building new world order based on humanity. Dear students, let's discuss now the characteristic features of peace and conflict studies. A near consensus about distinct features of peace and conflict resolution has emerged among peace scholars. Peace and conflict resolution is concerned with the problem of human conflict and its peaceful resolution, and therefore cannot be denied of a status of a discipline. Having said this, Rogers identifies the distinct features in the field of peace and conflict resolution. These include: number one, underlying causes. Peace studies is concerned with addressing root causes of direct violence as well as exploring ways of transforming structural inequalities and promoting positive social relations. Second, multidisciplinary approach. Peace studies draws from existing traditional disciplines in the social sciences and beyond. Most peace study centers have academics from different backgrounds, drawn from international relations, social psychology, philosophy, political science, anthropology, history, sociology, mathematics, health sciences, environmental sciences, and communication studies, law, and many more. Third, multi-level analysis. Peace studies embraces the analysis of conflict at all levels, micro, macro, mega, and the complex interactions between and among them. Number 4, multicultural or global outlook. Peace studies embraces a multicultural approach in which the sources of violence are located globally and regionally as well as locally. It draws on conceptions of peace and non-violent social transformation from all cultures. Number 5, analytical and normative. Peace studies is grounded in the quantitative and qualitative studies. Some scholars also draw to the field purely on ethical considerations. Such ethical considerations notwithstanding, the field has maintained strong academic standards due to level of critical analysis of peace study programs. Number 6, theoretical and practical. Within the field of peace and conflict resolution, there is a close nexus between theory and practice. Proper experiences are formed when there is a link between theoretical postulations and practical experiences. Thus, constant interactions occur between peace workers in the field and academics. Number 6, non-violent transformations. As emphasized in the definition of the field of peace and conflict resolution, conflict situations of whatever level and manifestations are settled using non-violent means. This quest necessitates a constant search for peaceful approach to conflict situations, whether actual or perceived. Dear students, like many other academic disciplines, the emergence and growth of peace studies was shaped by certain events. These include 2 world wars, development in international relations, and the Cold War. Others include the wars of decolonization, global north-south socio-economic disparity, environmental issues, and activities of peace movements and activists. Even though peace and conflict resolution as an academic field of study with its own institutions and journals was post-Second World War development. The First World War that led to the death of about 11 million young persons has raised concern among intellectuals over global peace. The emergence of peace and conflict resolution was indeed to fill a gap in academia, and this has also impacted positively on the practice component of the field, thereby producing a robust peace and conflict resolution discipline and conflict resolution practice. The relevance of the field as such will remain as long as the human conflicts persist. The various attempts to claim ownership of the field by traditional disciplines should only be seen as a result the continuous relevance of peace studies to contemporary academic and social issues. Dear students, it was all about today's lecture regarding emergence of the discipline of peace and conflict resolution. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Thank you.